Hey there, I'm Kat, and this is Brews and Reviews. Today's video is going to be a review of Bride by Ali Hazelwood. This is going to be a spoiler-free review that transitions into a couple of spoilers and discussion of tropes and stuff, but I'll let you know before it transitions into that, so if you want spoiler-free, then the start of the video is for you. If you've read any Ali Hazelwood books before, then you'll know that she is primarily a writer of contemporary romance, usually involving a woman in a STEM field. Now, this book is her first step into paranormal romance with a side of mystery, and I think if you're familiar with this genre, then she actually does this quite well. I do think it could be quite jarring for people who haven't really explored that genre before and are just picking this up because they enjoy Ali Hazelwood's contemporary romances, but I definitely think it's worth picking up. So this book is set in an alternate version of our world where vampires, humans, and wares, which are werewolves, but they are shortened to wares in this one rather than shifters, which I thought was interesting, but anyway. These three races don't exactly coexist, and the separation of them is sort of held together by various treaties. For instance, there is a treaty between the vampires and the humans, where a high-ranking human child and a high-ranking vampire child get held in enemy territory until they turn 18 as basically a hostage. If anyone does anything bad, then that child will immediately die. So that's nice. So the main character of this book is Misery Locke, and she was chosen to be one of these hostages. And she ended up growing up with a human friend who she views as her sister, and she feels very estranged from everybody else. The humans because they're terrified that she's a vampire, the vampires because she just wasn't part of their culture for a bit and they just don't seem to like her at all. And obviously she has no connection to the wares, so she just feels very ostracized by any community that she could be a part of. But when a new were becomes alpha of one of the packs, she's brought back to vampire territory, and her dad says that she gets to be the bride for the new alpha. Even knowing that last time there was an attempted vampire-were marriage, all the vampires were murdered. It's where you want to send your daughter, really. Misery's dad volunteers her for this marriage, and even though it's really dangerous, she has some ulterior motives for agreeing to it. So that's how she ends up married to Lo, and we get Bride. So that's all I really want to say about the plot. I feel like that's a nice little lead-in and a setup for where everything ends up going. So let's talk about Ali Hazelwood's writing style first. I feel like if you've read any of her women in STEM books, then you're probably familiar with how she writes, and that doesn't change in this book. Her writing is very easy to read, there's a lot of banter in it, there are a lot of moments that made me laugh, and I did find myself grinning quite a lot in this book. So if you're worried about the writing style, then I don't really think that you have to be. It's generally just a very easy read. Now, one of the interesting challenges that Ali Hazelwood has with this book that she hasn't had in her other books is the world building. Because Bride takes place in this sort of alternate reality, you have elements of our world, but then she has to combine it with elements of this paranormal world. So not only is she trying to describe the different physiognomy and cultures of these different races, she's also trying to integrate how all of these things work. I think some of the descriptions of the vampires, more so than the wares, are a little bit vague. I did have to guess a little bit. This isn't a spoiler, but one of the things you find out very late on in the book, I want to say 2/3 into the book, is that vampires have purple blood, and it wasn't mentioned at any point before that, and I just feel like it could have been, probably. So I think it's just like little things like that that struggled a little bit and probably could have been integrated a little bit better. I also think in terms of world building, it would have been really useful to have had a map, because even though it is technically set in our world, the borders of where all of these races live and like different factions are, like there's a couple of different were packs and the nest of the vampires and where the humans live. I think it would have been really interesting to be able to actually plot out where everything is in relation to each other, because you can imagine it, but they all just kind of sit in my head as like this blob here, and this blob here, because it's kind of glossed over a little bit. So the next bit I'm going to transition to probably will contain a little bit of spoiler stuff. I'm going to be talking about tropes and a couple of characters, and if you just don't want to know any spoilers, then you should probably click away. But before you go, just know that I rated this book 4.5 out of 5 stars on an enjoyment scale. If I was rating this technically, I'd give it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. So there are a couple of different tropes in this book, some of which Ali Hazelwood has done before, some of which he hasn't. So the first trope I want to discuss is probably deeply familiar to anyone that's ever read an Ali Hazelwood book, and it is the clueless woman meets hopelessly devoted man, because that is definitely a feature of this book. Misery, while incredibly smart, and I did enjoy the fact that there was still some STEM aspects to her, she is very good at computers and very good at hacking and that sort of thing, and that's definitely used throughout the book. But she is like really not socially aware, and I think that's explained quite well throughout the book. But her love interest, Lo, the alpha of the pack, is just so far gone for her, and I love it. Each of the chapters starts with a little thought from him, even though the rest of the book is from her point of view, and it's nice to just have like, a moment where he's just thinking about things, and she's just so clueless about all of it. Another trope that is heavily used in this book is the miscommunication trope. Now, I have thoughts about the miscommunication trope because it's a trope that I really, really actively dislike, and I don't think it was done in a way that made me hate it. I think it's because when Misery assumed something, she didn't ever ask about it, and she just was like, oh cool, it's fine, whatever, rather than it being deeply impactful the entire time. The only part of this book when the miscommunication trope really annoyed me was when it became a big thing, and Lo actively encouraged the miscommunication, and I really didn't like that because I'm like, that's just not fun. I think perhaps if that hadn't been in there, then I would have been like, oh my god, miscommunication trope done well, and then I was like, no, it's causing me physical pain again, why? And now we get into the tropes that Ali Hazelwood's not really used before, and that is fated mates and the omegaverse. So this is an interesting one because it's either something that you know about or something that you don't know about, and if you don't know about it, then you obviously didn't read enough fan fiction when you were younger. If you've ever read a shifter romance or a werewolf romance before, then you're probably familiar with how omegaverse books work. And I do have to say, if you are familiar with that, then it's quite a predictable book. You kind of know where it's going and what's gonna happen. But if you aren't familiar with that, which I imagine Ali Hazelwood has quite a chunk of people who aren't, then this is very new. I'm a person that is quite familiar with this. I've read, you know, a few books with that in it. So if you're new to Omegaverse, then I'm not really sure how you're going to take this book. I think it was quite a tame version of the Omegaverse, which is probably good because there is such a diverse group of people reading this book. Like, her audience is probably on like both ends of the spectrum of having read it and not having read Omegaverse before. But I think she does quite a good job of integrating that in a way that isn't overpowering. But then people seem to be a bit surprised by some of the things that happen towards the end of the book. And if you have ever read an Omegaverse book, then you wouldn't be at all. Trying to say that without explicitly spoiling anything that happens is just really difficult, and I totally failed at that, sorry. I want to discuss a couple of the characters before I get into just general thoughts that I had on this book. Misery is a really interesting character. I like that somehow Ali Hazelwood managed to get smart woman, which is what I like to call women in STEM. I just like to call them smart women, and she managed to sort of incorporate that even though this is a paranormal romance. Misery is not the most emotionally intelligent character, and I think that partly comes from like how vampires are raised, but also she was raised outside of vampires, so she's never really felt like she belonged anywhere, and it's quite difficult for her to understand general kindness that comes from anyone but the girl that she grew up with and views as her sister. There is a mystery aspect to this book because Misery's childhood friend Serena goes missing right before the start of the book. She finds a note that implies that the were-alpha may have something to do with it, so she is trying to lead her own investigation, and there are a lot of other things going on. I didn't find that totally predictable, to be honest. I didn't see where that was going. I feel like maybe I should have done, but I didn't. So I enjoyed that aspect of it. And honestly, the whole mystery aspect of it kind of reminded me of Danica from Crescent City, if you've read that, in the way that you're finding out a lot of things about a character who isn't there, but is very important to the main character. So I haven't really spoken about Lo, who is the alpha of the Werepack and Misery's love interest in this book, but I love him. He's great, to be honest. He shows himself to be very caring and considerate throughout the book, and I like how we see enough into his thought processes to see why he would withhold certain information, even if I don't particularly like that, but at least he thinks that he's doing the right thing, and I can get over it. I just prefer it when everyone has good communication, which this book does have in the end. So that's cool. I'm here for it. One of the things that I did really like, even though I know I said that we didn't find out certain things until really late, but every time we did find something out, I was quite interested in this, and it's the physiognomy of the different races. So vampires and weres have different biological chemistry. It's not just as straightforward vampires and werewolves. She did try and do some things that were different with it, and I appreciated those differences because there's something about a paranormal romance that just chooses to just do the obvious thing, whereas Ali Hazelwood at least attempted to create something different about her vamps and weres. And I don't know, the vampires in this are not dead, so that's quite an interesting factor to it. I enjoyed it anyway. But yeah, finding out all this stuff was appreciated, and I think it helped with the world building. Generally, the book was very predictable, but it also was really fun. And I don't know, the way that I sort of looked at this book is that anytime I read a shifter romance, sometimes like the world building and stuff can be good, but the writing can be a little bit off, and I want it to be sort of elevated from where it is, and it felt like this book had the writing down, and the shifter stuff was coming along with it. Like, it hadn't quite caught up, because sometimes I think that Ali Hazelwood struggled a little bit with the shifter descriptions, and there is one line that made me absolutely cringe because it just physically hurt me to read it, and that is "pop a knot. Pop a knot." And if you don't know what a knot is, you're probably of the audience that never read omegaverse stuff, and you might want to stay that way, honestly. But I think that she could get there, and one of the things that I'm really excited about is that there is definitely a lead into a sequel here, and I hope that she gets that sequel, because I really, really want to see the two characters that would be the leads in that book come into their own book, because I think they would be so good. And I'd really like to see how she sort of expands on this world, but also I'd like to see her writing develop a little bit more so that she can sort of go a little bit further with the descriptions of like the wares. Maybe this was too like soft a megaverse for me, and I wanted it to just be a little bit more, because of the fact it was a vampire and a were and they were in like pack territory. I just expected it to be like slightly more were focused. I still think for what it is, it does it really well, and it was a book that I really enjoyed, and I'm really glad that I read it. And as I said before, my enjoyment rating is like half a star higher than it would have been if I was just writing it technically, but even with predictable bits, I just had fun, and I definitely recommend it if you like paranormal romance and Ali Hazelwood's style, because I think they combine really well, and I would be so excited to see her write more in this genre. I just think it could go really well, and I would like that a lot. So I hope you enjoyed this review slash book talk, I guess. It's kind of turned into a book talk. I didn't mean for it to, but it did. So here we are, and I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!